Disclaimer: our true crime channel presents real-life stories that may contain graphic content, sensitive topics, and distressing details. Viewer discretion is advised. All cases discussed are based on publicly available information and should not be interpreted as endorsements or glorification of criminal behavior or to the guilt or innocence of persons discussed. 27 years have passed since the 6-year-old body of JonBenet Patricia Ramsey was discovered in the basement of her family's home in Boulder, Colorado. The young beauty pageant queen had been beaten and strangled. No one has been found guilty of the murder to date, but theories have circulated for decades. The discovery on the morning of December 26, 1996, shook the community to its core, and the case captivated the nation's attention almost immediately. It remains one of the most notorious unsolved crimes in the United States, and the circumstances surrounding her murder have inspired numerous books, documentaries, and television specials. Some emphasized the facts, while others emphasized their opinions. These stinging opinions would hit straight into the Ramsey's family orbit. In 2016, Burke Ramsey, JonBenet's brother, appeared on Dr. Phil's episode, JonBenet Ramsey's brother finally breaks his silence. What did the secret interrogation tapes reveal? During the interview, he disclosed that he was aware that his family members were suspects in the crime. In his first ever television interview, he told Dr. Phil, "I know people think I did it, that my parents did it. I know that we were suspects." According to him, he has always believed that a pedophile who watched his sister perform killed her. He said that he was speaking out at that time to honor her memory. "I don't want anyone to forget." Burke Ramsey concluded the interview by saying that the media would no longer hear from him and that he intended to live a peaceful life. Burke's wish lasted exactly 2 weeks. On the 18th and 19th of September, a mini-series aired on CBS titled The Case of JonBenet Ramsey. CBS's contracted team of investigators examined a 911 recording that continued to play after Patsy Ramsey believed she hung up the phone.
911 emergency. We need him. Police. What's going on? 5515th Street. What's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping.
The team believed they heard John Ramsey say, "We're not speaking to you," and Patsy asked, "What did you do?" on the phone call. The CBS investigators believe they were talking to Burke. The CBS's crew recreated a life-size replica of JonBenet's home and conducted their own investigation using reports from the night of the murder. Based on the evidence obtained, including police reports from the time of the homicide, they ruled out the possibility of an intruder breaking into the residence. The conclusion of the miniseries revealed that the CBS investigators believed Burke Ramsey murdered his sister. The renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Werner Spitz, who was featured in the miniseries, concurred with this conclusion. If you really use your free time to think about this case, you cannot come to a different conclusion. Spitz said, "It's the boy who did it." Dr. Spitz is a heavy hitter in the realm of forensic pathology. Included in his resume are the investigations of the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King. He also testified at the trials of Casey Anthony and Phil Spector and the 1996 civil trial against O.J. Simpson. But why would Spitz and others suspect JonBenet's 9-year-old brother of murdering her in such a gruesome fashion? In this video, Bad Things is going to give you why Burke could have done it and why Burke couldn't have done it. For the record, we think he is innocent, as we have stated in our previous video on the case. Why Burke could have done it. According to the following evidence, JonBenet's brother Burke may have severely injured JonBenet during a temper tantrum. Assuming JonBenet was already dead, or knowing she had been mortally wounded, her parents murdered her and covered it up. Burke's fingerprints were discovered by the police on a bowl of pineapple which was found on the kitchen counter. Pineapple was one of JonBenet's favorite treats, and the fact that it was discovered in her intestines during the autopsy indicates that she consumed some shortly before her death. Patsy Ramsey maintains she did not prepare the children a pineapple snack. Some believe Burke shared a pineapple midnight treat with JonBenet before her death, or that JonBenet ate some of Burke's snack, resulting in a temper tantrum that led to JonBenet's death. When queried about the pineapple during an interview about the murder, young Burke shields his mouth, one of the most common indicators that someone is concealing information. When a minor is murdered, he or she is statistically most likely to be murdered by an immediate family member. In conjunction with John Ramsey's statement, "We're not speaking to you," and Patsy asking, "What did you do?" some experts believe they can hear Burke's voice inquiring, "What did you find?" on the 911 phone call. According to Patsy Ramsey, Burke stayed in bed until later in the morning. When John Ramsey learned that JonBenet was dead, he said, "It has to be an inside job." While this does not implicate Burke, it is certainly odd and more consistent with the family covered-up theory than the intruder theory. Strangely, when John Ramsey discovered the body of his daughter and carried her up the stairs to the police, he did not cradle her, but instead held her away from his body. One of the detectives remembered seeing this and having a strong sense that one of the family members was responsible for her murder. Burke has difficulty communicating without smirking, which many believe is a form of duper's delight. Duper's delight is the satisfaction of being able to manipulate someone, which is often manifested by displaying an inappropriate smile. Burke was known for harboring animosity towards his younger sister. According to the housekeepers, he defecated in her bed and smeared his excrement on her Christmas gifts and bedroom walls. Judith Miller, a family confidant, remarked, "Burke had a bad temper. He had hit JonBenet. He hit her with a golf club." When asked about this incident, the Ramseys explained it away as an accident. In an interview with Burke 18 months after the murder, the then 11-and-a-half-year-old describes sleeping through the crime, highlighting that he sleeps really deeply and never hears anything. The author, former New York State prosecutor and former FBI profiler Jim Clemente commented, "When he says really deeply and never hear anything, that's overselling. That's deceiving." After reviewing Burke's other video interviews, Clemente appeared troubled by his behavior. In reference to Burke's demeanor in an interview shortly after the murder, Clemente stated, "I haven't seen any indication yet that this child has been through recent trauma." One of Clemente's colleagues remarked, "It's odd that he's acting it out," after watching a video of Burke reenacting the murder by striking the victim on the head with a hammer. Clemente continued, "On top of it, there is no emotion, no appropriate emotion at all about this happening to his sister." The dominant hypothesis that emerged from the CBS Group investigation was that Burke killed his sister out of anger and possibly the constant attention shown towards her due to her pageant career. Former investigator James Kohler stated, "I think the Ramseys came home around 10:30, 11 o'clock. Patsy remained downstairs with Burke and served him the tea and pineapple. She got JonBenet up, and then I think she was up and awake enough that maybe she would still be hungry, and she went downstairs. I think if Burke was upset about circumstances, he would have been upset about her taking a piece of pineapple. He would have hit her with a flashlight." The investigator then discussed the possibility of a cover-up on the part of the parents, stating, "She said that they loved their children. They would do anything for their children. She said she would have nothing else to live for if she lost Burke. That seemed to me motive to cover up for Burke." Clemente concurred, saying, "This is consistent with what the grand jury had wanted to indict them for. It's my opinion that the Ramsey family did not want law enforcement to resolve this case, and that's why it remains unsolved." Why Burke couldn't have done it. The evidence that an intruder killed JonBenet is so overwhelming that it seems inconceivable that Burke or his parents could have planted any of this evidence or covered up an accidental family tragedy. There was an open window, a shoe imprint on the wall below the window, and a suitcase placed under the window in the train room. This indicates that someone may have entered through the window and placed the suitcase there to make their way out after committing a crime. The suitcase also had a high-tech shoe print on it. John Ramsey had previously broken the same window when he locked himself out of the house. After Ramsey locked himself out of the house, the Ramseys hid a key beneath a rock on the front veranda. The morning of the murder, the key was missing. On the morning of the murder, it was discovered that the butler door, which is situated in the back of the kitchen, was left open. A flashlight was found on the kitchen counter. The flashlight did not belong to the Ramseys. A canvas suitcase was discovered in the home's crawl space. A fragmentary boot print was discovered on top of the toilet tank in the northeast bathroom of the basement, near the crawl space. Investigators discovered a high-tech boot print and a red pocket knife that did not belong to the Ramseys in the wine cellar where JonBenet's body was found. Another unknown footprint was also discovered, indicating that there could be two offenders. A neighbor discovered a latex glove in their alley's garbage can. A pubic hair of unknown origin was discovered on the blanket that partially covered the body. The waistline of her long johns was used to capture forensic evidence using the innovative touch DNA technology. The DNA found under her fingernails matched DNA found elsewhere. This DNA did not match any Ramsey family member. Unidentified palm prints were discovered near the wine cellar door where the body was later discovered. On the evening of the murder, neighbors reported seeing a dark van located across the street from the Ramsey residence. DNA and urine from an unidentified male were discovered in JonBenet's undergarments. Burke's baseball bat was found outside of the house. Burke has said that this was not out of the ordinary. He typically left it there. The bat had carpet fibers from the cellar carpet, indicating that it had recently been in the basement. No fingerprints, not even Burke's, were discovered on the bat. This implies that the bat was recently cleaned. The ransom note was written with a pen and notepad found in the home. This might suggest that one of the family penned the ransom note. It could also indicate that an intruder used the items. The pen was fingerprint-free, and the notebook was missing 7 pages of practice notes that were never recovered. The fact that they were never recovered suggested to some that they were taken by an intruder. Some believed that this was evidence against the Ramseys. There is speculation that Patsy was the author of the kidnapper's note. 2 sets of handwriting experts were brought in to compare Patsy's handwriting to that of the ransom note. Both parties agreed that there were no similarities, but not enough to conclusively identify the author. A scale is used to measure the likelihood that the author wrote the document. A 1 indicates that the individual unquestionably authored the text, while a 5 indicates that there is no way they could have written it. Patsy graded between 4.2 and 4.5. A rope in a brown paper bag was discovered under the bed in the guest room. JonBenet's bed contained remnants of the rope used for the garrote used to kill her. The coroner determined that JonBenet's intestines contained cherries and grapes, in addition to the pineapple discovered in the bowl. This negates the pineapple temper tantrum theory. Patsy, John, and Burke provided samples of their hair, blood, saliva, and handwriting on 3 separate occasions. All members of the Ramsey family, as well as 200 other potential suspects, were ruled out as the murderer. The touch DNA was traced to an unidentified male, the same male whose DNA was discovered in 2 bloodstains found in the 6-year-old's undergarments. Throughout the investigation, law enforcement and the detectives did not follow the evidence. They searched for evidence that supported a theory that the Ramseys or Burke were responsible. In their pursuit of the Ramsey family, investigators disregarded other potential suspects. One witness reported seeing a man approach JonBenet at a beauty pageant. When the man saw the woman watching, he introduced himself as JonBenet's father. The woman reported this after discovering she had been murdered and what the child's biological father looked like. 3 houses away from the Ramseys, an incident occurred around the time of the homicide. A mother was awakened by her child's screams. A man disguised as a ninja ran down the hallway and out the front door as the woman ran towards her daughter's bedroom. The young girl had been sexually assaulted by the assailant. The media never reported on this, and the police never investigated the incident as a link to the Ramsey murder. The 2016 interview with Dr. Phil stirred controversy and renewed theories about Burke. Burke smiles and laughs hesitantly throughout the entire interview. According to some, this showed that he murdered his sister. According to those who are close to Burke, this is his typical behavior. He had never given a public interview before and was apprehensive and shy. We need to consider when watching an interview such as this one that Burke and his parents have been under constant scrutiny since he was 9 years old. Burke Ramsey in no way had a typical childhood. Was his demeanor not appropriate for a crime that took place 20 years before the interview? Do you think Burke killed his sister? On December 26, 1996, JonBenet, a 6-year-old American child beauty queen, was found beaten and strangled in the basement of her family's residence in Boulder, Colorado. There was a garrote around her neck and duct tape covering her mouth. It was believed that she died the night before, but wasn't found until hours later. Though the case remains unsolved to this day, the police had several suspects in mind throughout the investigation, including her own parents and brother. Among the suspects on the list was a man called Gary Oliva, a homeless man who frequently visited the church near the Ramseys' home. In this episode, we'll take a more in-depth look at Gary Oliva to decide whether he's the most likely suspect for JonBenet's murder. The Ramsey residence housed a family of 4. John, the father, was a multimillionaire businessman and president of Access Graphics, a computer software company that had its headquarters located in Boulder, Colorado. Patricia, the mother, was a former beauty queen, Miss West Virginia of 1977. The brother, Burke, was 9 years old at the time. And then there's a little princess, JonBenet, who was 6 years old. In the early hours of December 23, 1996, a 911 call was made from the Ramsey home. It was reportedly a mistake made by a drunk party guest. On the 25th, the family attended a Christmas party hosted by their family friend Fleet White at his house. JonBenet receives a bike as a Christmas gift. After the party, the family goes home and JonBenet goes to bed. It is uncertain whether she snuck back downstairs to eat a late-night snack of pineapple, which was found undigested in her stomach. At 5:30 a.m. the next day, Patsy woke up and went to make coffee. She discovered a 2.5-page handwritten ransom note on the back stairs that led to the kitchen. The note stated that their daughter had been kidnapped and asked for $118,000 in ransom. Coincidentally, or not, this amount was the same as the Christmas bonus that John Ramsey had just received. Though the note ordered them to not call the police, Patsy dialed 911. Police officer Rick French arrived at the scene before 6 a.m. He conducts a search in the entire house, including the basement. He noticed a door that was secured by a wooden latch. However, he didn't open it, thinking that it was closed from the inside. It couldn't possibly be the exit route that the kidnapper had used. While the police were working with the family, preparing to comply with the instructions provided by the ransom note, they also had a forensics team come to the house. Because they believed that JonBenet was abducted from her room, they cordoned it off to prevent any evidence from getting contaminated or destroyed. However, they didn't take any precautions for the rest of the house. Aside from the police, Patsy had called family and friends about JonBenet's kidnapping. So friends, victim advocates, and even the family's minister visited the Ramsey residence to offer comfort and support. Some of them helped out by cleaning the kitchen after use, which quite possibly destroyed evidence. According to the note, John and Patsy would receive a call between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. However, 10 a.m. passed, and there was still no phone call. So at 1 p.m., John Ramsey and Fleet White, a family friend, were asked by Detective Arndt to look around the house to see if there was anything out of place in the house. The pair started their search in the basement. John opened the latch door, the same one that was overlooked by the police officer during the initial search, and found the pajama-clad body of his 6-year-old daughter inside. Ironically, this room was where the Christmas presents had been stored. JonBenet had been beaten and strangled. Her mouth was covered with duct tape. There was a nylon cord around her wrists and neck. A blanket was covering her torso. John picked up his daughter's body and took her upstairs. He also removed the tape from her mouth. He still believed that his daughter might be alive. He laid her down on the floor and, upon checking, lost that hope. An autopsy is conducted on December 27th by the Boulder, Colorado coroner's office. It was determined that JonBenet had died of strangulation. She had also suffered shocks from a stun gun, an 8-inch skull fracture, and sexual assault with a broken piece from the paintbrush that was used to make the garrote that strangled her. DNA was found underneath JonBenet's fingernails, as well as on her underwear and long johns. The kidnapping case had become murder, and the number of theories spouted by both law enforcement and the public were numerous. There were many suspects for the murder of JonBenet. The police mainly focused on her parents, but according to a few experts, an intruder was more likely to have committed the crime. So, was someone able to come inside the house that night? The police claimed that this was impossible. But there was a broken window in the basement. It was John Ramsey who had broken it before in order to get into the house because he had left his keys. According to the police, there were cobwebs on the window which they believed made it impossible for anyone to go through it without disturbing them. They had a photo to prove it. Because the Boulder County District Attorney wanted to explore other theories, they hired retired Colorado detective Lou Smith 3 months after the murder. According to his investigation, it was actually quite possible for someone to have entered the Ramsey home through the cellar window. And he demonstrated this fact, which can be seen through archived footage. Moreover, spiders can weave webs pretty fast. Who knows when this picture was taken after JonBenet was murdered? More importantly, the police reportedly found other possible entry points. 2 windows were left slightly open to allow the electrical cords for the outside Christmas lights to pass through, and a door had been left unlocked that night. In addition to having several possible entry points, the police also found a shoe print from a high-tech brand boot near the body. No one in the family owned shoes from this brand. Smith also found a smudge on the wall in a photograph of the crime scene. For him, this mark could indicate that someone could have scuffed the wall while shimmying through the window. In addition, there were also finger marks on the glass, as well as an unidentified footprint on the suitcase that was located below the window. According to Smith, the perpetrator might have wanted to use the suitcase to take JonBenet's body out of the house. That's not the only evidence that pushes the intruder theory to the forefront. It was later discovered that there used to be a metal grill blocking the entrance to the window. However, foliage had grown underneath the grill, indicating that it had been moved at some point. Moreover, the stun gun marks on JonBenet's body point towards a stranger instead of a family member. Though the police have long since claimed that no stun gun was used on JonBenet, experts, including a Colorado medical examiner, say differently. But if the murderer had taken JonBenet from her room all the way to the basement, wouldn't her parents have heard something? Well, not really. First, JonBenet was probably unconscious due to the stun gun. Second, the floors in the house were heavily carpeted. It was possible to walk around the house without making a sound. Moreover, they had just had a very eventful day. It's highly likely that they were tired and deeply asleep that night. So if it was an intruder who committed the murder, who is the most likely suspect? It was discovered that there were more than 100 burglaries that occurred in the Ramseys' neighborhood within the months before she died. Moreover, there were 38 registered sex offenders within a 2-mile radius of her home. One of them actually lived just down the street. He was identified by Smith and the Ramseys' private investigator, Ollie Gray, as a very credible suspect. His name is Gary Oliva. Who was Gary Oliva? Gary Oliva was the town drifter, a 32-year-old convicted pedophile who had been living in the area on and off. In fact, he frequently visited a church less than 2 blocks from the Ramsey residence. Oliva was also observed attending the candlelight vigil that was held shortly after JonBenet's death. In the photos of him during the 1-year anniversary vigil, he was seen holding a folder that was sealed tightly with a strip of smooth black duct tape. No duct tape was found in the Ramsey residence. In 2000, 4 years after the murder, Oliva was arrested for illegally entering the University of Colorado's Fine Arts building after hours. The police allegedly found a cutout of JonBenet Ramsey from a magazine in his backpack. They also found a stun gun. While it can't be confirmed when he started carrying it, it is still a detail worth noting when judging the possibility of Oliva being the murderer. A copy of the police report revealed that the police searched his phone. They found hundreds of images in his phone that depicted child pornography. In addition to that, he also had 335 photos, either of or related to JonBenet. Some of the photos were those you could find online. Nearly 20 of them were from her autopsy. Possibly photos that were leaked to the press previously. Other photos were of shrines to JonBenet. It was never confirmed whether these shrines were made by Oliva and where they are located. When asked, Oliva stated that he felt JonBenet's death was an exceptional loss. He felt the need to build a shrine to remember the little girl, so he carried a photo of her in his backpack. He even wrote a poem entitled Ode to JonBenet. As for the stun gun, Oliva claimed that it was given to him by a friend who was concerned about his safety. However, he was soon released, though they remained suspicious of him. In 2003, a memo written by investigator Tom Bennett to ADA Bill Nagel mentioned that he had conducted a background investigation of Gary Oliva. He was one of the persons high on the list of potential suspects. The investigation included an interview with Oliva. Bennett claimed that he found proof that Oliva was not responsible for the death of JonBenet Ramsey. Unfortunately, he did not mention what proof he found in the memo. In an interview with 48 Hours in 2002, Michael Vale, a high school friend of Oliva, claimed that shortly after the murder, Oliva had called him on the phone, distraught. He confessed to Vale that he had hurt a little girl. I hurt a little girl. Vale also stated that he had many cassette tapes made by Oliva talking about necrophilia and little girls. He also played some of these tapes, and one can hear Oliva talking, asking a little girl to sit on his lap and let him touch her back. In an interview with In Touch magazine, Vale stated that the knots used to make the garrotes were similar to the ones used by Oliva when he tried to choke his mother with a telephone cord. The incident with his mother occurred in 1991, just a year after he was charged with sexually abusing a 7-year-old girl. Oliva was also interviewed by 48 Hours. He claimed that JonBenet came to him after she was killed and revealed herself to him. He also described wanting to be a cowboy sweetheart, referring to a footage of the little girl wearing a cowboy suit. His obsession with JonBenet is very apparent. However, obsession does not equal to guilt. There is also evidence that makes us doubt whether Oliva really did it. First, let's talk about the ransom note. It was written on a paper pad from inside the house. The pen used was also from the Ramsey residence. Some believe that it was written after the perpetrator had murdered Ramsey. It's possible that he wrote it before. We can't say it definitively. That's not the important point. The amount specified on the note was pretty specific. It's a little unlikely that Oliva would know how much John had received as a Christmas bonus. Some say that he could have seen the pay stub, which was either on John's desk or inside a drawer. But would a paedophile take the time to rummage through a desk and read documents? It doesn't seem likely. His purpose was JonBenet, not to rob the Ramseys. That's not all. Oliva's handwriting does not match the one on the ransom note. Aside from the ransom note, we have the DNA testing results. DNA testing cleared Oliva for the JonBenet murder. The police couldn't connect him to the crime scene. Some question whether he was really cleared of suspicion due to DNA testing. Based on the list of individuals named in lab reports made available to the public, Oliva's name is missing. That being said, as a convicted sex offender, his DNA should have been entered into CODIS. And according to one web sleuth, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation did test his DNA, obtained through a cheek swab by the Boulder Police Department. It was not a match. However, we must take note that the BPD had acknowledged that the crime scene evidence had been mishandled. Moreover, lab results have shown that the male DNA sample obtained from JonBenet's clothes is most likely a mixture of multiple people's DNA. Simply put, it didn't belong to a single unidentified male. Moreover, there's no way to know for sure if the DNA was left by the murderer while committing the crime. Further DNA testing will need to be conducted. However, according to the authorities, the amount of DNA evidence available for analysis is extremely small and complex. They need to wait for proven technology that can reliably test this type of sample. Until then, DNA cannot be used to prove or disprove any of the suspect's guilt. In addition, there was another suspect who had a stun gun. More importantly, he also owned a pair of high-tech boots, the same as the shoe print found at the crime scene. That being said, the man, Michael Helgoth, killed himself shortly after the murder. DNA testing also showed that he was not a match. It must be said that there were so many investigative mistakes made in this case, starting from when the police first arrived at the scene. A lot of potential evidence may have been destroyed, possibly causing the case to remain unsolved to this day. There is quite a bit of circumstantial evidence pointing to Gary Oliva as the perpetrator, but there are also details that put his guilt into doubt. However, it seems that Oliva has finally confessed to killing JonBenet. In 2019, letters sent by Oliva to his friend Michael Vale was obtained by the Daily Mail. In them, he confessed to killing the little girl. In one of the letters, he states, "I never loved anyone like I did JonBenet, and yet I let her slip and her head bashed in half, and I watched her die. It was an accident. Please believe me, she was not like the other kids." In another one, he says, "JonBenet completely changed me and removed all evil from me. Just one look at her beautiful face, her glowing beautiful skin, and her divine God body. I realized I was wrong to kill other kids. Yet by accident she died, and it was my fault." The incriminating letters were reportedly written by Oliva while serving a 10-year sentence for 2 counts of attempted sexual exploitation of a child and 1 count of sexual exploitation of a child, charges in June 2016. They have been presented to the Boulder Police Department, and the authorities have cleared him. With a lot of conflicting evidence at hand, we can't clearly state that Gary Oliva is guilty of murdering JonBenet Ramsey. But if we were to judge the case based on what we found, he's quite possibly one of the best suspects on our list. In the early hours of December 26, 1996, Patsy Ramsey found a 2.5-page handwritten ransom note on the back stairs of their family home. It stated that their 6-year-old girl, JonBenet Ramsey, had been kidnapped for ransom. Several hours later, the little beauty queen was found dead in the family's basement. The ransom note in the JonBenet Ramsey case has been a subject of intense scrutiny and debate. Was it written by a stranger, or one of her parents. Handwriting analysis is not an exact science. Comparing the writing on the note with samples from family members and other suspects have resulted in contradicting views. The language used and the content of the note itself are quite inconsistent with your typical ransom notes from kidnappers. The length itself, 2.5 pages, raises questions. Is the note authentic? Or was it simply a means of distracting or confusing law enforcement from solving the case? Various theories and interpretations have been made regarding the JonBenet ransom note, which has become a sticking point in this case. Today, we'll take a deeper look into the peculiarities of this letter to find out its authenticity and the writer's motive. The note, as previously stated, was 2.5 pages long. It was handwritten and addressed to Mr. Ramsey. It said, "Listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. When you get home, you will put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of the money and hence an early pickup of your daughter. Any deviation of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. The two gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you, so I advise you not to provoke them. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies. You will be scanned for electronic devices, and if any are found, she dies. You can try to deceive us, but be warned that we are familiar with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Follow our instructions, and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny, as well as the authorities. Don't try to grow a brain, John. You are not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good southern common sense of yours. It is up to you now, John. Victory. SBTC. Despite being warned by the kidnapper, the couple immediately called police. When Patsy called 911, she told the police that there was a note left by the kidnapper. But when asked about the content of the note, she replied, "I don't know." When the police arrived at the Ramsey residence, John showed him the note, which was lying on the wooden floor of the hallway, which led to the foot of the staircase. He told the officer that the note was found by Patsy on one of the steps. Their versions of this part of the story differed. According to Patsy, she took the letter to John upstairs. John, on the other hand, stated that he ran downstairs and the note was still down on the first floor. He stated that he spread it out on the floor. Later, the couple used John's version of the story. As for the kidnapper, he never called, and the body of JonBenet was later found, tied up, beaten and strangled with a black duct tape over her mouth, in the basement after a second search was made inside the home. The family and the police never found out who the murderer was. As one of the most important pieces of evidence that could point to the murderer's identity, the ransom note has been analyzed by amateur and experts alike. The first fact that is known about the note is that it was written on paper owned by Patsy Ramsey, which was located on a little desk kind of area near the door to the kitchen. The pen used was also hers, which was found placed in its normal place, an orange metal container on the kitchen counter. In addition, there were no fingerprints on the ransom note at all. There is no record of the pen ever being tested. Of course, some of these details can easily be explained away. It's quite possible that the kidnapper wore gloves, so he didn't leave any fingerprints. In addition, there's no rule that states a kidnapper must use his own pen and paper when writing a ransom note. But we can't help but question why he wouldn't have prepared one if he had planned to kidnap JonBenet that night. According to experts, it would have taken the writer around 21 minutes to write the note. It's unlikely that an intruder would willingly spend that much time inside the house. After all, it would have been easy to get caught. Or did that mean he was unafraid of being caught? According to the police, there were missing pages from the notepad that indicated the kidnapper had written at least one practice draft based on some missing pages and ink bleed through on the pad. The missing pages, by the way, were never found. More importantly, how could John and Patsy's fingerprints be missing from the ransom note? Who would have the foresight to prevent the paper from being contaminated without knowing that it was a ransom note? They clearly stated that both of them had picked up the note, so why were their fingerprints missing? It's a question that has never been asked nor answered. Handwriting analysis. There has been a lot of debate regarding the handwriting in the ransom note. Some experts believe that the note is not an ideal specimen for handwriting analysis, despite its length. This is because the type of pen used, a broad fiber tip pen, masks and distorts fine details in a person's handwriting. Could the handwriting have been disguised? Some experts don't think so. They state that it's actually difficult to disguise one's handwriting the longer a document is. In addition, they claim that there's no evidence that the writer disguised his or her handwriting. Handwriting analyst Gideon Epstein disagrees. He believes that there was actually an attempt to disguise the true handwriting habits of the writer. Ted Widmer, director and principal instructor of the International School of Handwriting Sciences in San Francisco and author of Crime and Penmanship, has stated, "This ransom note was written by a person who was trying to disguise their handwriting." Karen Ionette, a handwriting consultant of various agencies, also believes that the handwriting is disguised, pointing to the slow, tense, hesitant pressure pattern and patching made in letter structures beginning on the first page of the note. If the handwriting is disguised, then is it even possible to find out who the author is using handwriting analysis? It's hard to say. Here's what we do know. Handwriting analysis has ruled John Ramsey out, but it couldn't eliminate Patsy from the list of possible writers. There are some consistencies in the individual letter formations and letter combinations between her handwriting to that of the author's, but it isn't enough to positively identify her as the author. Some experts, such as Gideon Epstein, are certain that she was the one who wrote the note. Others, including several certified forensic document examiners, are not as certain, though they believe that it is highly probable. The language of the note. There have been many interpretations regarding the words used in the note. For example, the misspelled words in the ransom note, such as business and possession, was considered unusual by forensic linguistic expert James Fitzgerald. According to him, the misspelling might have been done on purpose to disguise the writer's level of education. Fitzgerald also reports that the font-style printing is a feminine trait. Patsy Ramsey used this letter form in her handwriting. He believes that it is unusual for both handwritings to come from the same household and to be so close. The tone of the ransom note was also analyzed. According to forensic document examiner Brenda Anderson, this fake ransom note has less emotion than a typical anonymous threat. A person who wants to threaten or intimidate someone will emphasize certain words in the letter. However, The writer did not do that, which led some experts to believe that there was no real threat. If it were JonBenét's parents who wrote the letter, they would have no reason to put that much emotion in the note. Aside from the tone, many have commented that the language in the ransom note bears strong similarities to certain movies. Let's take Dirty Harry, for example. There are similar phrases in the movie that can be read in the ransom note. Now listen to me carefully. If I even think you're being followed, the girl dies. If you talk to anyone, I don't care if it's a Pekingese pissing against a lamppost, the girl dies. That's the end of the game. The girl dies. It sounds like you had a good rest. You'll need it. Aside from the similar lines, there are also some similarities in the storylines, such as the specified denomination of bills and the type of container for delivery of the ransom. In the movie, the kidnapper uses counter-surveillance, and then there's the fact that the girl was already dead, while Harry was running all over town. That being said, there are no verbatim quotes. Not a single phrase in the letters could be directly attributed to Dirty Harry or any other movie. It could simply be coincidental or an overinterpretation of some. Or the writer has watched a lot of crime movies or even crime fiction and took inspiration from some of them. All in all, we cannot definitively state that these similarities are relevant to identifying the author of the note. What about the ransom amount? Like many details about the note, the amount of the ransom was also questioned by many. Why $118,000? According to science, humans have an irrational preference for round numbers. So why not 120,000 or 100,000? Why that specific number? According to John Ramsey, he received a bonus of $118,117.50 from the previous year. It was paid in February 1996 and would show in his monthly payment stub for the rest of the year. Some believe that this indicates inside information. Only someone close to the family or a person connected to Access Graphics could have knowledge of this. However, proponents of the intruder theory argue that the kidnapper could have seen a paycheck stub while he was at the house. He was, after all, inside for several hours. The kidnapper could also have seen Ramsey's handwritten ledger, which showed that he had a total liabilities amounting to $1,118,000. Of course, if the kidnapper actually looked at the rest of the ledger, he would have seen that the Ramseys had a total net worth of $6,230,628. So, why would he request an unusually small amount? Some propose that the number could have a biblical reference, while others think it might have a movie reference. For example, The Silence of the Lambs has a runtime of 118 minutes. In the movie Nick of Time, 1:18 p.m. is the exact time at which the father could have saved his 6-year-old daughter, if only he had killed the governor. Another theory about the ransom amount is that it was equal to exactly 1 million Mexican pesos using the prevailing conversion rate at the time. Could it be that the intruder was from Mexico or of Mexican descent? Or did he plan to go to Mexico after he got the money? Speaking of foreigners, the writer mentioned that he was part of a group of foreign terrorists. Some of the details in the letter support this claim, such as being familiar with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics, the word victory, and the use of an abbreviation for their organization, SBTC. The kidnapper never elaborated on what SBTC stood for. There are many interpretations provided by theorists on this, such as "shall be the conqueror," which is a phrase connected with one of the suspects, John Mark Carr. "Signed by the captain," which is a common phrase in sailboat racing, where a win is referred to as a victory. "Square," "Bible," and the compass, which are 3 Masonic symbols seen on their crest or seal. "Stand before the cross," which is part of a scene in the Dirty Harry movie. "Strangled by the cord," referring to how JonBenet died. While it's possible that the kidnapper was a foreign terrorist, there's also a hint of familiarity and enmity towards John Ramsey. He calls John a fat cat and warns him against trying to grow a brain. Though he starts the letter by calling John Mr. Ramsey, he mentions him by his first name a couple of times towards the end of the note. This supports the theory that the writer is someone close to the Ramseys, someone who might have easy access to their home and have knowledge about John's bonus. The kidnapping could really have been an inside job. However, some argue that the phrase "good Southern common sense" indicates that the writer was a stranger. John Ramsey was originally from Michigan. Patsy was from West Virginia. Someone who knew the family well would not have made this kind of mistake. Not unless he wanted to throw off the investigators. Experts have worked up different profiles on the ransom note writer. According to retired FBI agent Clint Van Sant, the writer is a well-educated female between the ages of 29 and 40. She knew the family as well as the home very well. The words "be well rested" and other caring or nurturing language used in the note convinced them that the writer was female. The FBI further deduced that JonBenet was already dead when the note was written. A forensic psychologist, Stephen A. Diamond, analyzed the note in 2017 and came to the conclusion that the writer is an intruder for whom English is a second language. A member of a foreign faction, perhaps. Some theorize that the author could be the father, John, or her half-brother, John Andrew. But based on the evidence that we have discussed, it is highly unlikely that it was one of them. Two handwriting experts, Mozelle Martin and Dawn McCarty, recently told the US Sun that there were significant similarities between the handwriting on the note and Gary Oliva's handwriting. Gary Oliva is one of the suspects in the case, though he has already been cleared by the Boulder Police Department. A local reporter named Chris Wolf was also suspected of writing the ransom note. According to his live-in partner who turned him in, Jacqueline Dilson, his handwriting resembled the one in the note. Forensic document examiner Lloyd Cunningham also testified that he cannot eliminate Wolf as the author of the note. Moreover, there was a single editing mark on the note that experts claim point to the author having a degree in journalism. Wolf has a master's degree in journalism. That being said, Patsy also has a bachelor's degree in journalism. And based on everything we've looked at, she just might be the best suspect in this case. At least, as the writer of the ransom note. As for why a ransom note was written, there are several theories that cover that as well. If it was truly Patsy who wrote the letter, it might have been used as a diversion to mislead the police during the investigation and point to an outsider committing the crime. If it was a stranger, the ransom note could have been part of a real kidnapping plot that went wrong. It could also have been a way for the murderer to confuse the police as to why JonBenet was missing. Or it could be that the author wanted to get John out of the house for nefarious purposes. We may never know. With so much conflicting interpretations and a lack of definitive evidence, we cannot safely conclude the true motivation of the writer, nor identify him or her. We can only hope that the answers will be found one day, and the enduring tragic mystery of JonBenet's death will finally be solved. If a survey were to be taken among true crime enthusiasts on which case they would like to see solved, our bet would be that the majority would say the JonBenet Ramsey case. In 2024, the enigmatic murder of JonBenet Ramsey has an increased likelihood of being solved 27 years after the 6-year-old child was discovered strangled to death in the basement of her family's Boulder, Colorado home, according to her father, John Ramsey. Join us as we look at the reactivation of the case, who's involved, the total ineptitude of the Boulder police, and what we can expect to learn with the authorities' renewed interest in the infamous cold case. Nearly 3 decades after the senseless murder of 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey, a glimmer of hope has appeared as a devoted cold case team began re-examining key evidence that might ultimately reveal her killer's identity. The Colorado cold case team's renewed investigation into the long-standing mystery has sparked interest and hope, especially for JonBenet's father, John Ramsey, who has long sought justice for his daughter and himself. In a recent interview with 60 Minutes Australia, John Ramsey says he's starting 2024 with more hope than ever before. "I am more optimistic than I've been since the beginning," he said, following the completion of a year-long study by the Colorado Cold Case Review Team into his daughter's murder. In 2007, legislation was passed to establish the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's Cold Case Team, the Cold Case Task Force, and the Cold Case Database. In 2022, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation obtained funding to set up a full-time cold case team. The cold case team includes 4 agents, 1 analyst, 1 forensic investigative genetic genealogy analyst, and a supervisor. They also have 2 DNA and 1 latent print forensic scientist working with the team. A multi-agency team consisting of personnel from the Boulder Police Department, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, District Attorney's Office, Colorado Department of Public Safety, and Colorado Bureau of Investigation coordinated and worked extremely hard on the resumed attempts to solve the case, District Attorney Michael Dougherty said. These agencies collaborated with private labs that specialize in different types of DNA analysis, according to Dougherty. The Boulder Police Department's initial investigation received considerable backlash for focusing on JonBenet's parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, as primary suspects. "They made up their mind on day one, and the conclusion was that I killed my daughter," John said in an interview. "There's nothing more dangerous than a police department that's made up its mind, because they are totally excluding anything that conflicts with that conclusion," he noted in the 60 Minutes interview. When asked in November 2022 whether he believed the case would ever be solved, John Ramsey said, "Not if it stays in the hands of the Boulder police. No, I don't. I really don't." How does Ramsey feel about his accusers being deeply embedded in the new investigation? While Ramsey has often feuded with Boulder police officers, he claims that things have changed dramatically in the investigation and at the BPD. The police department finally has competent leadership, has dealt with the problems in the detective division, and has included the FBI in discussions on how to proceed, Ramsey said. "All I have asked is that they do all that is possible using the latest DNA sampling technology available in the private sector, and then proceed based on the results," he added. The multi-agency team had its work cut out for it on the Ramsey case. According to the BPD, an intensive effort digitized all evidence to create a comprehensive and searchable database containing thousands of information files, bringing together more than 21,000 tips, over 1,000 interviews conducted across 17 states and 2 foreign countries, and samples from more than 200 different individuals, including handwriting, DNA, fingerprints, and shoe prints. The JonBenet case file is said to now consist of nearly 2,500 pieces of evidence and roughly 40,000 reports, with more than 1 million pages documenting the investigation, according to BPD officials. A fresh inventory of all collected evidence was made available for investigative review, which would not have been possible without the assistance of the FBI, they added. Although the team has kept their cards close to their chest, an investigator and forensic pathologist have some idea or opinion on what evidence is being looked at and shared their thoughts on the 60 Minutes episode. John San Agustin. Within days of JonBenet's murder, police contacted Detective John San Agustin. Boulder police were ill-equipped to handle a case of this caliber and hoped the seasoned detective could point them in the right direction. The former detective said he was brought in to help with the Ramsey cold case investigation, but became frustrated within hours after reviewing the evidence and the BPD's unwillingness to listen to any theories that contradicted their own, namely that a family member was involved. There were at least 2,500 leads in the early part of the investigation that literally were never followed up on because tunnel vision existed from the moment the murder happened. The focus was on John and Patsy Ramsey, he explained. San Agustin showed 60 Minutes the back doorway leading to the Ramsey house and original crime scene images from that cold day in 1996. The photograph showed an open basement window with a suitcase beneath it. Fibers from the young beauty queen's clothes had been discovered in the case, a scuff mark on the wall which may have been from a shoe, and shards of glass lying on top of the case. According to San Agustin, the evidence suggested that an intruder was involved in the murder.
Yeah, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes, right, to know that this is what we call a clue, right? You got an open window, you got a scuff mark on the wall, you have a suitcase. On the suitcase is some broken glass.
It was first said that there were no traces of forced entry at the Ramsey family home, where JonBenet had gone missing before being discovered dead in the basement 7 hours later. No tracks were found in the snow, but a boot imprint was discovered later. It was also discovered that a damaged window in the basement had been left open, which was first discounted as an access point, but an investigator later proved that a person could fit through it. According to San Agustin, all of this evidence was dismissed by the BPD, but was by no means the only evidence they dismissed and kept from the family. One of the most shocking pieces of evidence pointing away from JonBenet's parents was comprised of blood-stained underwear and fingernail clippings. On February 15, 1997, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation completed the initial DNA testing in the Ramsey case. This was the first DNA test conducted by law enforcement in this case, and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation said from the start that the DNA was mixed. This means that more than one source was discovered in the DNA sample. The written report presented to the Boulder Police Department said that the DNA profiles developed from bloodstains from panties as well as from right and left-hand fingernails from JonBenet revealed a mixture from which the significant component matched JonBenet. If the minor components were contributed by a single individual, then John Andrew Ramsey, Melinda Ramsey, John B. Ramsey, Patricia Ramsey, Burke Ramsey, and Jeff Ramsey would be excluded as a source of the DNA analyzed on those exhibits. This DNA evidence, excluding the Ramseys, was completed just a little over 2 weeks after the murder, yet the authorities neglected to inform them of this crucial fact. It would take 11 long years for the Ramseys to get an apology for this injustice. July 9, 2008. Mr. John Ramsey, as you are aware, since December 2002, the Boulder District Attorney's Office has been the agency responsible for the investigation of the homicide of your daughter, JonBenet. I understand that the fact that we have not been able to identify the person who killed her is a great disappointment that is a continuing hardship for you and your family. However, significant new evidence has recently been discovered through the application of relatively new methods of DNA analysis. This new scientific evidence convinces us that it is appropriate, given the circumstances of this case, to state that we do not consider your immediate family, including you, your wife Patsy, and your son Burke, to be under any suspicion in the commission of this crime. I wish we could have done so before Mrs. Ramsey died. To the extent that we may have contributed in any way to the public perception that you might have been involved in this crime, I am deeply sorry. No innocent person should have to endure such an extensive trial in the court of public opinion, especially when public officials have not had sufficient evidence to initiate a trial in a court of law. I have the greatest respect for the way you and your family have handled this adversity. Another expert featured on the show has also aired his misgivings about how the BPD handled the case and mishandled the vital evidence he supplied them with. Dr. Michael Doberson. Alex Hunter, the Boulder district attorney, decided to get help in solving the crime after continually hitting his head against a wall with the BPD. He turned to Lou Smith, a seasoned Colorado Springs homicide detective who had recently resigned from the force. Smith was known as a no-nonsense evidence man, a tenacious detective who often solved complex crimes after others had given up. Smith's assignment was to investigate the police's assumption that one or both of JonBenét's parents, John and Patsy, were involved in the murder. As Smith examined the evidence, he became confident that someone had broken into the home and killed JonBenet while her family was sleeping. Smith resigned in protest in September 1998 after the BPD kept him in the dark as they kept up the "parent did it" narrative. Smith declined publicly discussing the facts that led to his intruder theory. "There's a vicious killer out there," he went on to say, "and nobody is looking for him." When Smith initially started investigating the murder, the primary BPD belief was that one of the parents had bludgeoned their daughter in a fit of rage, possibly because she had wet the bed, and that one or both of them covered up the crime by staging a murder and drafting a fake ransom letter. At one stage, Smith believed the parents were the probable culprits. But as he examined the evidence, including police crime scene images and video, he started to question his initial assumption. Smith learned that a basement window was open, and the window well outside revealed evidence of a recent disturbance. However, the police unexpectedly denied an officer's request to send police dogs to find a probable scent trail. Smith discovered leaves and trash, including foam packing peanuts, outside the home in the window well. He discovered identical leaves and foam peanuts inside the basement, including one 60 feet away in the room where JonBenet was found, possibly indicating that an intruder inadvertently transported the material into the basement after entering through the window. "The wind sure didn't blow those in there," Smith said. Smith noticed a fresh print on a high-tech sneaker, a brand that no one in the family owned. Smith examined autopsy images and saw strange abrasions on JonBenet's back and face. Smith questioned whether they were caused by a stun gun, an unusual weapon for a parent to use on their child. Smith measured the markings and determined they matched a stun gun called the air taser. He began to believe that the perpetrator may have used the stun gun on JonBenet when she was sleeping and then took her to the basement. The Boulder police disputed Smith's stun gun explanation. They sent some of the autopsy photos to Arapahoe County coroner Dr. Michael Doberson, who had studied stun gun injuries on pigs just 3 months before the murder, to discount Smith's theory. According to the BPD, Doberson said that he did not believe that the marks were caused by a stun gun, as Smith indicated. However, he denied saying that. Doberson has claimed that he was misquoted. "That was something of a misstatement, since my real conclusion was that I couldn't, at that time, say whether this was a stun gun injury or not, because we had to have a weapon to compare it to." Doberson said he requested further information, including more images and a stun gun matching the markings. However, Doberson never heard from the BPD again. It was Smith who brought him the taser and the close-up photos of the injuries. When Doberson clarified what he actually said, acquired the additional information he requested, and concluded that the experiment reveals precisely the same marks and cell changes that were seen on JonBenet, the Boulder police, who initially approached him as the expert on stun guns, ignored his expert opinion. If you are shocked by the ineffective and blinkers-on approach of the BPD concerning the evidence put forward to them for a possible intruder killing JonBenet, their bungling police work would become more evident just 9 months after the gruesome crime. 9 months after JonBenet's unresolved death, a young girl from the same Boulder, Colorado dancing school as the murdered beauty queen was assaulted in her bed by a masked intruder. The girl, known by the alias Amy, woke up in the early hours of September 14, 1997, to discover a man dressed in all black standing at her bedside with his hand over her mouth. The perpetrator used Amy's first name and threatened to knock her out if she yelled. Amy was physically and sexually assaulted by the unknown perpetrator over a few terrifying minutes. Amy's family thinks the man meant to kidnap her. However, the planned kidnapping was thwarted when the girl's mother came into the room holding a can of mace, having awakened to the sound of whispering voices down the hall. Amy's family members compared the intruder to a ninja who escaped the house by jumping out of a second-floor window and disappearing into the night. In an interview, Amy's father said that he thinks the assailant had been watching the family for some time before the incident occurred, most likely targeting his daughter at her dancing school, Dance West, before striking at an opportune time. Police documents acquired by a major news site showed that detectives were alerted to a possible hiding place where Amy's assailant may have been while watching the victim and her family. 2 months after the assault, the family's immediate neighbor informed authorities that they had discovered proof that someone was living in a seldom-used flat above their garage. According to the records, the illegal resident left behind various items and rubbish, including empty beer cans, which were taken by BPD detectives. It is unknown if the objects were ever tested for DNA, and the Boulder Police Department refused to respond when asked. Amy's father told authorities that whoever had been living above his neighbor's garage was most likely responsible for sexually abusing his daughter. Amy's father also asked authorities to look into the possibility that the assault on his daughter was related to the death of JonBenet, who was discovered murdered less than 2 miles away barely 9 months earlier. In addition to attending the same dancing school, both girls took part in several public events in the months before their victimization. However, Amy's father said that Boulder police were dismissive and disinterested in exploring any apparent similarities between the two crimes, and that they were even hostile to him for making the suggestion. JonBenet's father, like Amy's father, believes that his family was being watched in the months leading up to the murder. Ramsey described the parallels between the two crimes as unbelievable. More shocking, he added, was that Boulder investigators ignored Amy's father's request to examine the cases together. "It could very well be the same guy," John said. "I really thought this was related. There's a similar mode of operation, and it needs to be considered a possible link. But it's shocking, absolutely shocking, that Boulder police didn't investigate the link. They absolutely should have." Amy's father accused the BPD of mishandling the investigation into his daughter's assault by neglecting to properly secure evidence, ignoring promising leads, and overall being uninterested and unhelpful. He has often called the case investigators incompetent and arrogant. His statements have mirrored John Ramsey's description of BPD investigators. According to Amy's case documents, 2 of the investigators who investigated JonBenet's murder also looked into Amy's attack. The investigators were Linda Arndt and Thomas Trujillo. Arndt, who had been the sole law enforcement officer on the scene when JonBenet's body was discovered, was removed from the Ramsey case in 1997 after receiving harsh criticism and ridicule for how she handled the investigation and failed to safeguard the crime scene. After taking a prolonged medical vacation for physical exhaustion and strain, Arndt was assigned to Amy's case on September 17th, 3 days after the assault. According to the investigation, Amy's parents informed Arndt that they both felt the assault was tied to JonBenet's case. Arndt also interviewed several of Amy's acquaintances, which enraged her father since it essentially exposed her as a victim of sexual assault to her peers, something the family had hoped to keep hidden. Trujillo was recently removed as chief of the BPD's investigations section and transferred to night patrol after an internal evaluation showed that several unnamed incidents were not adequately handled between 2019 and 2022. "It's like a second bank robbery in a small town. You've got to look and see if there's a connection," Ramsey would say. And in my mind, there was a huge connection, both in terms of how it was accomplished, the fact they were both children, and that my daughter and Amy both went to the same dance school. But they didn't. It's insane. Not everyone is as excited as Jon Ramsey about the new news. Many online commentators feel that it just feels like a case of déjà vu. One Redditor posted, "Here we go again, a one-sided Jon Ramsey storyline. Told, of course, by Jon Ramsey using a female talking head. There is no new evidence that will solve this crime. My only question is, where was Jon Ramsey all those years JonBenet has been in a cold grave? Not looking for her killer like he is now at 80. Another added, there was no new evidence. What can we expect from the Colorado Cold Case Review Team? Nothing. The Colorado Cold Case Review Team has spent the last year reviewing the JonBenet Ramsey homicide investigation to generate investigative recommendations, which the Boulder Police Department and the Boulder District Attorney are getting ready to act on. According to a case update published nearly 27 years to the day of Ramsey's murder, and more than a year since the Boulder Police Department's last statement. The tragic case is still in the hands of the department that bungled it in the first place. JonBenet Ramsey. What most likely happened? This video delves into the dark secrets of one of America's most perplexing murder cases. Take a step with us into the shadowy world of the JonBenet Ramsey case, a haunting tale that continues to baffle and captivate the world. We peel back the layers of this enigma, exploring the labyrinth of evidence, theories, and unanswered questions, where innocence was shattered and whispers of conspiracy still linger. As we navigate the twists and turns of this perplexing case, we will show you evidence that an intruder may have killed this innocent child. Brace yourself for a disturbing voyage into the labyrinth of the JonBenet Ramsey case, where each revelation reveals yet another layer of chilling mystery. On December 26, 1996, John and Patsy Ramsey reported that their 6-year-old daughter, JonBenet Ramsey, had been kidnapped and that a ransom note demanding $118,000 had been found. A few hours later, she was discovered murdered in her Boulder, Colorado family home. JonBenet Ramsey's shocking murder marked the beginning of a decades-long mystery. In the days, weeks, months, and years that followed, authorities and amateur detectives tried to answer just one question. Who murdered the child beauty queen? Had it been a home intruder? Under the media's constant scrutiny, police considered hundreds of possible suspects as the investigation progressed. They investigated the lives of a housekeeper, neighbors, and even pedophiles in other states. JonBenet Ramsey's murder remains unresolved, despite numerous false confessions and clues. On the surface, JonBenet Ramsey's brief existence appeared extravagant. JonBenet, born on August 6, 1990, to John and Patsy Ramsey, spent most of her time competing in and winning children's beauty pageants. JonBenet had won numerous titles by age 6, including America's Royale Miss, Little Miss Colorado, and National Tiny Miss Beauty. She had also posed for several glamour photographs, which many later considered inappropriate for her age. Aside from the pageant work, JonBenet's life was relatively ordinary. She attended High Peaks Elementary School in Boulder, Colorado, while living with her wealthy parents and older brother Burke. On December 25, 1996, she and her family celebrated Christmas. This would be the little girl's last. According to her parents, everything appeared to be in order when they put their daughter to bed that night. No one, other than the killer or killers, knows precisely what happened between that night and early dawn the next day. The Ramseys realized something was amiss at 5:30 a.m. when Patsy saw a piece of paper adhered to the staircase. What she had discovered was a 2.5-page ransom note. In the note, the author claimed, "We have your daughter," demanded $118,000 for JonBenet's safe return, and vowed to call with more details by 10 a.m. tomorrow. "I just recall reading, 'We have your daughter,'" Patsy Ramsey would say later. "I just felt an overwhelming anxiety, and I just dashed back up those stairs as fast as I could and pushed her door open. Patsy said that because JonBenet was not in her room, she awoke her husband and dialed 911. "We have a kidnapping," she cried on the phone. "Hurry, please. There's a note left and our daughter's gone." Although police, family and acquaintances searched the residence, no trace of the girl was found. Most officers left after a few hours, leaving Linda Arndt, a detective, to wait with JonBenet's parents. Arndt, who found it peculiar that neither parent reacted when the hijackers did not contact them by 10 a.m., suggested that John Ramsey conduct a second search of the residence. She told him that he might be able to notice if anything seemed out of place. John then went down to the basement, which the police had not yet searched. John discovered JonBenet's body there. She had been savagely beaten over the head, strangled with a nylon cord, and one of her mother's paintbrushes, and possibly violated. "I knew instantly what I found. I found my daughter," John Ramsey later said. She was lying on a white blanket. The blanket was wrapped around her. Her hands were tied above her head. She had tape over her mouth. After the gruesome discovery, the Boulder Police Department made numerous mistakes that compromised the investigation, including allowing JonBenet's father to move the body and not conducting separate interviews with the parents. Even before the body was discovered, the police allowed multiple visitors into the residence, contaminating the crime scene. Some visitors had even cleaned the house, possibly removing any traces that had been left of the possible murderer. It is believed that the failure of the police to adequately secure the entire crime scene is one of the primary reasons why the case has been so challenging to solve. A subsequent post-mortem depicted a dismal picture of JonBenet's death. The 6-year-old's cause of death was asphyxia by strangulation with associated craniocerebral trauma. In other words, she had been severely struck in the head and strangled. It did not take long for John and Patsy Ramsey to become suspects. Considering that JonBenet's body was discovered in her family residence, it is probable that a close relative was responsible for her death. Her mother and father were also suspiciously quick in securing legal representation. Early investigations did indeed appear to circle back to the Ramsey residence. The garroted rope used to kill JonBenet, one of Patsy's paintbrushes was used to create it. The type of paper that was used for the ransom note, it had been removed from an existing notepad in the residence. The pen used, also present in the home. Even the contents of the ransom note appeared questionable. First, it was extremely long, while ransom notes are typically brief. In addition, the author wanted an exact sum of money, $118,000. That was the precise quantity of bonus money John Ramsey received that year. The police quickly began to view John and Patsy Ramsey as their leading suspects. The theory was that they accidentally murdered JonBenet and then staged the crime scene to make it appear as though she was murdered by an intruder. Meanwhile, JonBenet's parents denied the allegations vehemently. However, as the investigation dragged on, some detectives began to examine alternative options. Initially, Lou Smith, a retired Colorado detective, called out of retirement to help with the investigation, suspected the parents. However, the more he investigated, the more he questioned their culpability. Instead, Smith believed that the intruder had entered through one of the home's many open windows, specifically the basement window. Using evidence such as an unfamiliar shoe impression near the crime scene and a potential stun gun imprint on JonBenet's body, he argued that this unknown individual was the murderer of JonBenet Ramsey. However, most Boulder police officers prioritized JonBenet's parents as suspects. Smith eventually quit the case out of frustration. "I cannot in good conscience be a part of the persecution of innocent people," Smith stated. "It would be highly improper and unethical for me to stay when I so strongly believe this." But perhaps the most startling theory is that Burke, JonBenet's brother, who was only 9 years old at the time, was guilty of JonBenet's murder. This theory gathered momentum following the 2016 CBS documentary series, The Case of JonBenet Ramsey. According to the documentary, JonBenét's intestines contained undigested pineapple, and a tray of pineapple was discovered in the kitchen. However, Patsy denied having prepared pineapple for JonBenet. Burke prepared the pineapple as a midnight snack, according to the controversial theory. However, when JonBenet took a piece, Burke allegedly struck her on the head with an object, possibly a flashlight. Assuming JonBenet was dead, their parents orchestrated her murder scene. In response to the series, Burke Ramsey sued CBS for $750 million, but the case was resolved out of court. If the parents or her brother did not murder JonBenet Ramsey, then who did? Unless the family murderer theory can be conclusively proved, the most likely theory is that of a home intruder. See if you agree with our supporting evidence that an intruder killed JonBenet, and leave us a comment in the comment section below. Watch till the end when one of the world's most famous profilers weighs in on the case. Reason 1. The existence of evidence that JonBenet had been sexually violated is one of the most substantial clues that this was an intruder crime, as it is uncommon for a husband and wife to conspire to cover up abuse committed by only one of them. This evidence is equivocal, and it is unclear whether or not she has ever been sexually abused. There was no evidence of sperm, and the official conclusion is that sexual assault cannot be ruled out. Reason 2. If the parents were compelled to murder their daughter to cover up their son's attack, garroting would not be the method of choice. It is too slow, intimate, and inhumane. Reason 3. The bloodstain on JonBenet's undergarments contained DNA from 2 individuals who were not in the Ramsey family. Reason 4. Police discovered an unlocked door in the Ramsey residence. 2 basement windows were also left open, so Christmas light cables could be brought in from outside. An additional basement window was broken before the murder of JonBenet, which would have allowed entry into the Ramsey residence. Access to this window has since been debunked. Reason 5. In the months preceding the murder, there were over 100 burglaries in the Ramseys' neighborhood, and a staggering 38 registered sex offenders living within a 2-mile radius of the Ramseys' home. Due to JonBenet's greater visibility as a contestant in a child beauty pageant, some believe she was more susceptible to pedophilic abduction by a stranger. Reason 6. There were no traces of blood discovered in the Ramsey residence. This shows that JonBenet was likely already deceased or close to death when the head trauma was administered. This disproves the notion that strangulation was used as a cover-up after Burke lashed out and mortally struck his sister in the head. The first of the 2 methods used was strangulation. Reason 7. The mind hunter himself, John Douglas, consulted with the Ramsey family and wrote that he is convinced they are blameless. There are few individuals in the true crime sphere whose opinion carries as much weight as Douglas's. John Douglas's theory about what happened to JonBenet, based on decades of profiling, goes as follows. JonBenet Ramsey's killer was a white male, relatively young, who had a personal grudge against John Ramsey and intended to carry it out by defiling and robbing him of the most valuable thing in the world to him. He entered the house while the family was out, either through the basement or with one of the many unaccounted-for keys to the Ramsey home, carrying with him a stun gun, a roll of duct tape, and a spool of cord. His intention was to incapacitate her, abduct her, and molest her. The ransom demand was an afterthought and could explain why it was written on materials found in the home. He had no intention on collecting such a low sum. He was just trying to make a point, and possibly cast suspicion on the Ramseys. It's also possible he had already written a shorter and more succinct ransom note, but that given the amount of time he had to himself, wrote a longer one. He went up to JonBenet's room, incapacitated her with an air taser stun gun, which would not have made much noise, taped her mouth shut, and then took her downstairs. He began strangling her either during or right after the molestation, and whether he meant to or not, caused her death. When he realized what he had done, he finished the job with a quick blow to the head, and instead of taking her, he fled the house in a panic. Who are the known suspects if Douglas's and others' assertions are right about a home intruder? Gary Oliva. Gary Oliva, 32, was a known sexual offender living in Boulder, Colorado, when JonBenet was discovered strangled to death in what appeared to be a possible sexual assault. In 2000, when he was arrested on narcotics charges, police allegedly discovered a magazine cutout of JonBenet Ramsey in his backpack. He was released, but suspicions persisted. Ollie Gray, a private investigator for the Ramsey family, once referred to Oliver's connections to JonBenet as a bombshell arrest and criticized the Boulder PD for not considering him a more credible suspect. Soon after, Oliver's high school friend Michael Vale supported Gray's suspicion with an allegation. Vale alleged that shortly after the murder, a distraught Oliver called his long-standing friend and confessed that he had hurt a little girl. "I hurt a little girl." Vale also told a magazine reporter that he was disturbed by the similarity between the knots used to construct the garrote that strangled JonBenet and those used in an incident where Oliver tried to strangle his mother with a telephone cord. Oliver was also rumored to have ties to a theory that connects the markings discovered on JonBenet's body to a stun gun encounter. At the time of his initial arrest, Oliver had a stun gun in his possession. While he was exonerated by DNA testing for the murder of JonBenet, he was later charged with 2 counts of child sexual exploitation for possessing child pornography. Michael Helgoth. According to Ollie Gray, another possible suspect was an electrician named Michael Helgoth, who worked at a nearby auto salvage yard. Gray referred to Helgoth as a hellraiser involved with a purported Ramsey family property dispute. Could this have been a potential motive for seeking vengeance against the family and kidnapping JonBenet, as John Douglas alluded to in his profile? It has been theorized that when 26-year-old Helgoth learned that he could be a suspect in the case, and officials discovered a boot print that resembled his near the Ramsey residence, he committed before authorities could reach him. His death occurred 2 days after the Boulder DA announced a new suspect at a press conference in 1997. Helgoth has apparently been exonerated by inconclusive DNA evidence. John Mark Kerr. In 2006, a former school teacher named John Mark Kerr confessed in graphic, explicit detail to strangling JonBenet in 1996. After facing child pornography allegations in the US, Kerr was apprehended in Thailand, where he was living as a fugitive. The now 58-year-old initially inserted himself into the case by emailing Michael Tracy, a professor at the University of Colorado Boulder, who was producing a documentary on the case. Once the emails took a disquieting turn, exposing the adult man's sexual fixation with JonBenet, Tracy reported Kerr to the Bangkok police, who detained him as a potential suspect. His DNA did not match the profile of an unknown male discovered on the waistline of JonBenet's long johns, and he was ultimately cleared after being transported to Boulder for questioning. Kerr's delusional confession included several diary entries purportedly penned at the crime scene. In one dramatic account, Kerr recalls strangling JonBenet during a failed love game. Kerr's alleged involvement made international headlines, and his insistence that he murdered her was sufficient enough to spark a media frenzy. However, he was ultimately disregarded as a suspect and dismissed as a pedophile seeking notoriety and fame. According to a report, the former suspect lives in the Pacific Northwest under a new name and gender. Despite all the confessions, clues, and conspiracy theories, authorities are no closer to solving this case in 2023 than in 1996. Decades after the murder, the question remains: who murdered JonBenet Ramsey? Time will tell if we ever receive a definitive answer. For now, the complete truth about JonBenet Ramsey's death tragically died with her.